Okay, so now came another problem regarding the Northwest frontier, because of course now it was under the British Empire. A boundary was proposed to be drawn in order to separate the British India from tribal regions in the north. And Lord Lytton, who was Governor General at the time, suggested the idea of drawing the border in order to safeguard India from tribal warfare and invasions which were taking place in the north. So Sir Mortimer Durand signed an agreement with the ruler of Afghanistan for fixing a border, and hence the border was known as Durand Line, named after Sir Mortimer Durand. It was introduced by Lord Dalhousie at that time, and the law stated that if the ruler was governing poorly or had no male heir, then the throne would be elapsed and the ruler's land would come under the British Empire. And so Satara, Nagpur, and Jhansi came under the British Empire merely with the excuse of the doctrine of lapse. And Nawab of Awadh, who had many legal heirs, was still uh, stripped of his kingdom on the pretext of misrule. And so the doctrine of lapse helped the British to expand within India and increase the size of the British Empire within India. So now comes the big question, which has to cover everything that the British had to do in order to establish themselves and spread throughout India and start to rule the locals who had once done very well in ruling themselves. And it has much to do with Indian weaknesses and British strength. So the Indians were not a strong uniting force. Of course, in the Battle of Buxar, we had three parties come together, but that was also proved unsuccessful. And this just goes to show that there couldn't have been a Indian victory with the British unless each and every kingdom within India had come together and tried. And that was also a big maybe at the time because not every kingdom had the same views of the British. Not everybody wanted the British to be driven out, as we see that the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir had actually helped the British in the Battle of Aligarh. So another reason was that the Indians had outmoded weaponry and they didn't really have the innovation and experience to improve their weaponry and modernize their weaponry against the cannonballs and rifles of the British. And the third one, which is really a reiteration of the first, is that the British were believed to be no big threat by some kingdoms, which were clearly in disbelief that the British could really take over India. But of course, it happened before their eyes, and India became an English empire. And this mixed perception of the political climate within India also became a deep set Indian weakness. And now moving on to the British strength. Of course, the British had experienced the Industrial Revolution, which made communication fast and European weaponry advanced. And this gave all the advantage in war and calling out reinforcements in battle. Secondly, they had legitimized their rule through courts as well as the ideology of racial superiority, which most people thankfully did not buy, but that did not stop the British themselves from believing so that they were morally obligated to rule over the inferior brown races in India. And the same happened with Africa. So this ideology had really fueled them to go on and given themselves legitimacy and also presented it to the locals, which they colonized. And of course, when they established courts, they took into account the morals of the Hindus and the Muslims and were taxing the locals excessively, leading to exploitation within India. And the third reason was the imposition of British administrative systems. You see, when a foreign system comes into a, a place, it really gives the owner of that system a huge advantage over the locals of that area, because the locals don't know how it works. They don't have any say in how it should work. And so everything comes onto the foreigner that has established that system. And that gave the British an upper hand. It gave them a good political advantage. And we see that the Indian civil service, which was set up along with the system, was to have 1,000 purely British administrators. And we'll see that in 1870, much, much later, where there was recorded a total of one Indian officer in the Indian civil service. So this is, very ironic, but it was reality at that time. And again, this gave the British upper hand because they were the ones who were shaping the lives of the locals as per their needs, as per the British Empire's own needs. Okay, so now to get an overview of British rule and see more clearly all that they changed, all that they abolished, and all that they kept same within India, which was very little, frankly. So we will be looking at the acts which were passed, the economic, social, and political status that the British Empire had at this point within India. So let's start with the Charter Act of 1833. So this act was again a way of the British to legitimize whatever they were doing. So this allowed Indians to be a part of the civil service administrating India. However, the exam for getting to the civil service was taken in England and was to be written in English. And of course, both of these things were very much alien to the locals. Of course, there was a small class, the higher class, which did at this point know English, but going to England and for the local laymen, this was, not even possible. So this act was really a way for the British to say that they were definitely not taking any rights away from the Indians, but the difficulty that they had posed for the Indians to actually come in the civil service was enough to hint that they didn't really intend for the civil service to be a majority of Indians. And again, of course, high taxes were demanded by the British, and sati was banned in 1829. Sati was a Hindu ritual in which, with the death of a man, his wife was to be burned alive with him. And of course, this was one of the better things that the British did do in India to ban sati. But of course, this did also offend the Hindus who had sati as a very old tradition which they had followed and their ancestors had followed, and banning it all together did lead to resentment. Thuggi was also a cultural practice, mostly in the Hindu societies, where there were many gangs who used to steal or loot, and this was really part of the way of life in India now. So when it was abolished in 1839, that was also somewhat of an offense to the Hindu culture itself. And then in 1834, English replaced Persian as the official language. And so this was like the complete erasing of the influence of the Mughal Empire, because that was the time in which Persian was the official language and had stayed so throughout the British expansion in India. However, this again led to a cultural shift because language plays a huge role in the culture of a place, especially in India where it was so rich. So, this was a greater offense for the Muslims because with Persian, Muslim rule had been established within India during the Delhi Sultanate, which was the time in which Persian actually came into India and had influenced the Mughal Empire as well. So for the Muslims especially, Persian was a religiously significant language. And when it got replaced with English, it was not taken well by Muslims, especially Muslims, despite the fact that the Hindus also spoke Persian. It was usually taken to offense by the Muslims. And so in 1835, a year later, education was also to be in English, and model schools were set up, and in them, Sunday church as well as co-education was compulsory. And this was another worry for the locals, especially the Muslims, because they were more conservative towards these ideas and they really didn't like change. And the same could be said for the Hindus, but it was worse for the Muslims here. And then, of course, the Christian missionaries who were allowed to preach in India was seen as a violation of was seen as a violation because people thought that they were to forcefully convert people to Christianity. When electric telegraphs and the steam engine increased communication, it was not really used for the locals initially and was for the British and strictly high class Indians in the 1850s. This just goes to show that the British did not give a lot of thought to the locals at this point, and this led to unsatisfaction from the locals. And here I will end the lesson on British rule in India, and next time, hopefully, we will come with a detailed account of the prominent freedom fighters and local rulers who had resisted this British rule. And we've already studied about some of them, Siraj ud-Daulah. And in the next video, hopefully, we will talk more about them. I hope you enjoyed the videos. Do not forget to give a thumbs up if you found this video helpful, and leave a comment down below for any critiques or basically anything I could do to improve the future videos. And stay safe. I will see you guys very soon.